All right, so we're going to get into it. So how can your participation in March Madness, or just maybe knowing about kind of what I would say like cultural phenomenon that are going on in the location where you are, how can that information help you win at the interview? So we're going to kind of talk through some of these ideas specifically related to March Madness. So, couple things to keep in mind just in terms of the US specifically. So more than half of Americans call themselves sports fans. And this is according to a Gallup poll. And so that means that a lot of people watch and are fans of sports. So we're not necessarily specifically talking about basketball, but just kind of keep that in mind that a lot of Americans enjoy sports, they participate in them, and that sort of thing. So it's something that people can use as a way to connect with other people. So kind of sports fandom is a great way to connect with people in business. And there, obviously you can connect with people that you work with in that way, but we're going to focus on how you can connect with people when you're interviewing. So the thing about keeping this in mind is that having this knowledge and being kind of aware of what's going on around you, locally and regionally and beyond at the time of your interview it helps bring confidence to your interview, to your preparation, and then to actually going through that interview experience. So it brings about a confidence, especially for women, because a lot of times, you might associate sports with being something that might be exclusive to men or people who identify in that way, and that's not necessarily the case. And so being able to talk about that as somebody that maybe identifies as a woman, I think can bring a lot of confidence to the workplace. And kind of on the flip side too, being able to talk about women's sports in general, as somebody that maybe doesn't identify as a woman, can definitely help you stand out, because a lot of times the focus tends to be on the men's sports instead of women. So a couple of things to kind of keep in mind there. So when are you going to be talking about this stuff in your interview? Well, we in the United States call this small talk. So kind of just chatter, water cooler chatter that you would use once you're at the job. So in terms of small talk in an interview setting, we're talking about conversation that might happen at the beginning of your interview when you arrive, and maybe you are greeted by the hiring manager or whoever you're meeting with, and they might bring you back to their office, or right at the beginning when there's a couple of minutes there, you're just kind of getting acclimated to your interview. You're going to be talking about things that have nothing to do with the company or the position. You might be talking about things like the weather, or what you did that weekend, or in this case, you might be talking about March Madness because it's going to be going on for a significant amount of time. There's, a 2 to 3 week window here of where this tournament is going to be going on. And so being able to reference that during your small talk might be something that you want to leverage. So this is what happens at the beginning of the interview. And it's definitely a cultural thing. I mean, there may be other cultures outside of the American US culture that doesn't do this, but this is something that we do here. And so if you're not used to that, it might seem kind of odd to you, but just kind of keep that in mind. So this is going to happen before the interviewer actually jumps in with actual questions. This also may take place just kind of, in between, like transitions in your interview experience, especially if you're maybe meeting with multiple people at the interview. So if you have kind of a series of interviews, one right after another, there's going to be some transition time. And so this is another area where you might actually come across that small talk. And again, small talk is known as kind of water cooler chats. This is something that you would experience once you're at the job. So where you're with your coworkers, and you're gathering around kind of the not specifically a water cooler, but that's what it's kind of known as, is you're kind of just gathered around having conversation that has nothing to do with, the company or the position or that sort of thing. So that's kind of what small talk definition is. So some things to think about with small talk is that it's unpredictable. So it's not something you can really prepare for in terms of what to anticipate topic wise, but it's definitely something that you can kind of think through beforehand, depending on how much you know about the person that you're going to be interviewing with, because there may be an opportunity for you to do some research on your interviewer that may give you some ideas about how to approach small talk or how to initiate that. And it may be also likely that you experience an interview setting where there isn't small talk. So that might also happen. And I think that will just be dependent upon maybe the personality of the interviewer. So there are some folks that really like to chat and, do small talk. And then there are others that are more kind of just to the point, we're here for the interview, and that's what we're going to focus on. So just kind of keep that in mind. There's not really a right or wrong scenario. It's really going to depend on the interviewer, and you'll want them to kind of take the lead on that. And again, small talk is going to vary by culture, but in the United States, if you're not from here, this is something that you're going to find is very common in the interview experience. So in terms of some purposes, again, we're kind of breaking the ice at the beginning of the interview, because as you probably are aware, it can be, a nervous experience for you as the interviewee. And so this can be a way that the interviewer can kind of help put you at ease and make you comfortable. So that is one purpose of small talk. Why we do it is to kind of help make the interviewing experience a little bit more comfortable for the interviewee. And then the employer might also be using this as an opportunity to assess transferable skills like your listening skills and your communication skills. And we'll talk a little bit more about how that may look in just a few slides here. The employer may also want to see how you act under pressure. Again, even though the conversation has nothing to do with the company or the position at hand, they're still evaluating you in terms of those soft skills and career competencies that they may be looking for in a candidate that they want to hire. So small talk in this context is going to give you a chance to form a good impression, for the company or for you, but then also at the same time, you're able to kind of get an understanding of what the company may be like as well, just by having those conversations in your interview experience. So it's a way that you can kind of assess the organizational structure, maybe get a sense of what the work environment is like for you as the candidate that is also kind of, interviewing the company per se. So it's kind of a two-way street in that regard. So I have 6 tips for small talk that we're going to go through, and I see something's coming through the chat. So let me just check this real quick, see if there's a question. William, that's a good question. The question is small talk only started by the interviewer? Not necessarily. So we'll actually cover that here in a minute. There may be there's kind of different levels of small talk. And so the very kind of beginning level is where the interviewer kind of initiates that. But then I think a mid-level or a step above that would be where you as the interviewee is initiating the small talk. Now, personally, I love it when I meet people for the first time, like even if I'm meeting a student for a coaching appointment, I love it when they kind of initiate small talk with me personally. So I think that it can definitely be a positive to initiate that conversation. So you can kind of get a sense of, what might be appropriate based on your interactions with the company up until that point and kind of how you're feeling. Or you can just let the employer in this instance kind of take the lead on that. So it can definitely be a situation where you can initiate that for sure. But most likely the employer is going to kind of start that conversation. So I know that wasn't a straight yes or no answer. A lot of it is just kind of, depends on the situation and context and kind of how you're feeling things out. So my first tip for small talk is to be engaged. So again, this is going to be where you can showcase your interpersonal skills. So in this instance, you want to be able to listen more than you talk and ask thoughtful questions. So going back to March Madness, if let's say you did a little bit of research on the interviewer and you saw that they went to Duke. Okay, so let's say that they went to Duke, they studied, XYZ degree. It's very likely, probably that they know about the Duke Carolina rivalry. Like that is a local rivalry to North Carolina that is huge. And I'm not from North Carolina. So when I grew up, I really wasn't plugged into the Duke Carolina rivalry. But once I moved to North Carolina, I definitely could sense that you're either Duke or you're Carolina, right? So if you know that maybe you're going to be interviewing with somebody that went to Duke and this is March Madness or it's basketball season, whatever it is, then you might talk about, a game that they have coming up in that, did you pick Duke to win it all or something like that? So this is where you can kind of ask thoughtful questions based on the research. And then that's an open-ended question where they might kind of ask and engage with you to kind of start that small talk experience. So again, you want to kind of listen more than you talk, ask thoughtful questions, demonstrate nonverbal communication skills. And so that would be by, nodding your head, smiling, kind of engaging them with eye contact. And so those are things that would demonstrate, at least in the United States, that you're engaged with the person that you're talking with and you're interested. And so those things are going to be positive for you just in terms of your interview performance. And so you do want to kind of keep your answer short when you are answering questions or when you're talking, not 1 or 2 words short, but just something that's not going to be kind of too verbose, if you will. You don't want to kind of go on and on and on. You want to kind of keep it, I would say maybe under 30 seconds or so. And then stay engaged, make sure that your phone isn't out and distracting you, make sure it's on silence, just some of those kind of general interviewing tips. But the number 1 tip here is to be engaged. And then the other next tip is to stick to safe topics. So again, going back to the definition of small talk, we're talking about topics that are not controversial and that have really nothing to do with the job or the company at hand. So these are some ideas of topics that are not controversial. So weather, the traffic, sports, these are safe topics. Doesn't mean that you have to be a fan of sports. I'm going to give you some resources here in a minute where you can kind of get some bite-sized information about sports that might help you. So you want to try to stay away from topics that can be seen as controversial, which, for example, would be politics and religion. You also want to make sure that you're not really discussing personal information, like your family, or anything to that regard. So you want to try to keep things away from personal information. Make sure that you understand what questions U.S. employers aren't allowed to ask candidates. So there are questions that employers in the United States are not allowed to ask candidates because they're illegal. And a lot of times those questions center around, things like your marital status or your family situation, or your race and ethnicity, your age, those sorts of things. Anything that has to do with kind of like a demographic, a personal demographic, or something that could be used negatively, whether that is, from unconscious or conscious bias. You want to make sure that you know what those questions are. So I would just avoid discussing anything personal, like your family. They don't need to know that you have, kids at home, or that you are, supporting a spouse, or, whatever it is. You want to try to stick to you as the candidate and stick to topics that are safe, so that you don't get into a position where you're divulging information that may kind of come back and be a deciding factor for you in the interview, whether, again, that's unconsciously or consciously. So stick to safe topics. And then you want to stay on topic. So again, let the employer kind of take the lead on some of these small topics. If the conversation seems to linger longer than needed, try to steer the conversation back to why you're there, which you're there to do the interview. So if you feel like you've spent, 5 or 10 minutes of your 30-minute interview talking about, the weather or the traffic or whatever it is, you want to try to veer that conversation back to you as the interviewee. So tip number 4, I kind of already mentioned this, but just listen more than you talk. So people like to listen to themselves talk. So kind of think of like the 80-20 rule, where 80% of the time you're listening, and then 20% of the time you're asking questions. And then again, practice those active listening skills and ask thoughtful questions based on what they say. So if the employer, if you're having a conversation about March Madness and they say, yeah, I'm excited about this game with, let's say, Purdue and Wisconsin. I picked Purdue to win. Well, follow up and ask a question. Well, why did you pick Purdue? Do you have a connection to Purdue? Like, what was it that made you pick Purdue over Wisconsin? And get a better understanding of kind of what their thought process was around it. And the really cool thing about March Madness in general that I think you'll find as you kind of get into it is that a lot of times people participate in these bracket challenges and with their office or with people that they know or whatever it is, with different groups of people. And some people are really, really strategic in who they're picking. They're using data and analytics to kind of make that determination. And then other people just pick, schools because they might have a personal connection with the school, or they might like the color of their jersey. Like, I don't know, I'm just going to pick Carolina because I like the Carolina blue color. It's kind of fun to see like the reasoning behind that. And so those are some things that you can ask in regards to, small talk in the interview with specifically to March Madness, which I think is kind of fun to see what that thought process is behind. And make small talk work for you. So again, avoid sharing anything that is too personal, that may shed a negative light on you. Just kind of keep things professional, keep things focused on the employer, and then move forward in that interview process. And then I definitely recommend practicing, especially if you are, if English is like your second language or another language, maybe it's not your native language. If you feel like you are not confident in your English speaking skills, I recommend practicing small talk with an American English speaker. So you can meet people, obviously on campus. You can utilize, different events, go to clubs and organization meetings, go to the International Coffee Hour to meet other people. I'm sure you can meet other American English speakers there and practice your small talk. The more that you practice, the more that you're going to be confident in your English skills. And a lot of times, it's not so much the skill, the language skill, as it is just kind of engaging with the person from a content perspective. But practicing is kind of the best tip that I can give in terms of helping you get used to kind of that small talk. So again, looking at March Madness specifically, kind of reviewing some of the tips that I've already mentioned that you can take with you to kind of leverage this cultural phenomenon is stay current on the teams locally and regionally. So again, we're in North Carolina. Duke Carolina is a huge rivalry, even outside of March Madness. They obviously play each other in their conference. They're also in the same conference too, in the ACC. So Hannah touched a little bit on the different conferences, but keep abreast on what's going on locally or regionally. You might have an interview with a company out in Texas or California or something like that. So take a look, about teams that might be in the tournament out there. For example, if you happen to have an interview during this time of the year, look at the office for visual cues, or research the interviewer on LinkedIn. Like I said, if you see that you're interviewing with somebody, they went to Duke, okay, that's kind of a starting point. If you go to somebody's office and you see that they have something related to a different team, then you could start that. Like I don't know if you can see, but I'm a Green Bay Packers fan. I don't know if you can see that on the camera. So I have a little Packers football here. So that can be a conversation starter for anybody that likes football. And then you can kind of, go from there. But be knowledgeable about both tournaments. Like I said at the beginning, a lot of times I feel like in my spirit experience that anything, a lot of times the women's tournaments or women's sports tends to get overshadowed by men's. And I'm sure that, there's a lot to unpack with that, but be able to talk about both tournaments. Make sure that you kind of know, because there's differences in the teams too, that are like, doing really, really well. So make sure that you're kind of looking at both of those. Ask the person that you're meeting with if they have a bracket. Ask them how they picked their final four. Again, just kind of engaging them, knowing that this tournament is going on. It can be a good way to start that conversation. And again, pay attention to what they're saying. Ask them how they got hooked on a particular team, and that can lead to some fun answers and kind of banter back and forth with the interviewer. So what if you're not a sports fan? What if you have no idea about sports? You're not really sure what to say, how to go about, finding information. Here's some things that I would think about, that I would consider. The first thing is that I think a lot of countries outside the US specifically, football is really popular. And in the United States, the average American doesn't really watch soccer. So soccer is our football. So our kind of American football. So just kind of keep that in mind. Again, do some research. Pay attention to the key clues that you see maybe in people's offices, and you might see that they have like a Charlotte FC flag or something like that. That would likely tell you that they are a soccer fan, or they watch football, or they might watch another sport. Keep track of what sports are being played during which seasons in the US. So right now, obviously, we're in basketball season. We are beginning professional baseball. So baseball is kind of in their spring training period. We just finished football not that long ago, and so there's kind of like the cycle of sports that kind of happen. And again, there are other things that are going on as well that aren't those traditional kind of basketball, football, baseball sports. So there's definitely soccer that's going on. There are also athletes that are preparing for the next Olympics. So that is something that is a worldwide event that you could maybe talk about. But spend 5 minutes a day or 5 minutes a week or whatever makes sense for you, tuning into top sports headlines to kind of have a baseline awareness. So I subscribe to the Daily Skim just for news in general, but a lot of times at the bottom of their newsletter, they'll have some references to sports culture that I think is really helpful. And then I also found The Gist is a good resource. So these are just two kind of like resources where you can get bite-sized information about kind of cultural things that are going on. And then you could also say something like, have you been watching the Olympics? If it's, time for the Olympics, like the next Olympics is going to be next year already. It seems like we just had an Olympics. So there are already people kind of getting ready for training and that sort of thing with world championships and etc. So these are some small talk examples. These are examples that you would use responding to questions. So like this week, I was interviewing for our graduate assistant role in our office. And so one of the things that I, asked when I was kind of bringing candidates back to interview was like, how was your spring break? Okay, so that's just kind of a, something that recently happened. I knew that, we're in the university environment and students were on spring break last week. So I wanted to know how was your spring break? So you could respond with, what you did. So in this instance, the person went to Myrtle Beach with a group of friends. It was their first time visiting the beach on the East Coast. And then they followed up with, do you like the beach? And then me as the interviewer could say whether I like the beach or not, and kind of go from there. So that's kind of a basic small talk example. They might also just ask you like, how are you doing? And so you could say, talk about how you started your day. In this example, I started my day with a yoga class. So I feel, relaxed right now and ready for the day. And then, maybe you ask something like, have you ever taken a yoga class? And they may follow up with yes, no, and kind of go from there. Or let's say that you are interviewing with a company on a Monday and they said, did you have a good weekend? And then you would say, yeah, I had a fun weekend. This is what I did. I explored uptown, or I took in a concert. And then maybe you mention or ask about, have you ever seen or heard of XYZ artist? So this is a way that you can kind of engage with the employer, but then also follow up with questions to ask to kind of keep that small talk going. And then examples for initiating or asking questions. So if you are from outside the United States, maybe you ask the person, have you ever been to, and insert your home country? Have you ever been to Argentina? Have you ever been to Brazil? Have you ever been to India? Have you ever been to Scotland? Whatever it is. Again, going back to basketball, I saw Duke beat Carolina, or Carolina beat Duke, whatever happens, last night in men's basketball. And then that's just kind of like a statement, right? It's not necessarily a question, but it's a statement. And then the interviewer is going to respond in some way based on that statement. Or you notice that they have a Starbucks downstairs. I see that you have a downstairs Starbucks. Do you like their coffee? Okay, so asking them about, are they a coffee drinker? Do they like Starbucks? Maybe they like tea. They would probably tell you a little bit more about that. And then let's say that you were at the organization and you heard people talking about a chili cook-off. So you could say something like, I heard some people talking about a chili cook-off. Is that something that you participate in? So that would be a way to engage whether or not they like to cook, or if they like chili, or if they're competitive. And then you could kind of go from there. So those are some small talk examples that you can use when you want to initiate and ask questions. So in terms of resources and how we can help you, I wanted to make sure that y'all had that information. We do offer our career meetup program, which is basically kind of like our small group coaching sessions with other students. And those are either going to be led by a career coach like myself, or they're going to be led by a industry or employer professional. And it's going to be centered around a career coaching topic. And so we do have an interview series coming up at the end of March. So we'll have a variety of meetups. A lot of them are virtual, some may be in person, but we'll have a lot of meetups that are centered around kind of this interviewing topic that you may want to take advantage of to learn more about, behavioral interviewing, or how to prepare for a virtual interview, network interviewing for introverts. Those are just some example topics that we typically offer. We also have a career guide. You can access our career guide at our website, which at the end here, I have a QR code that you can scan. you can go directly to our website. So in our career guide, we do have an interview preparation section in the back where you'll find a list of common interview questions. You'll find information about behavioral based interviews and the STAR framework. So that is a good start for getting you some interview prep. And then along those same lines, we have our interview prep program where you can set up a practice interview with a career coach like myself. You can also utilize our big interview platform, which you have access to 24/7. And this platform uses artificial intelligence to help students practice answering interview questions. There's also an interview curriculum as well that you can go through. And then the last piece of our interview prep program is our practice interviews with employers. So periodically we'll have practice interviews with employer partners that will volunteer their time to do practice interviews with students. And so that's a great opportunity to practice your interview skills while getting feedback from an employer who is in the business of hiring people. So it can be really valuable experience to take advantage of. And then this is how you can connect with us. So we're beside Atkins Library. We're right across from the CGLL. If you haven't been to our office, scan that QR code. It's going to bring you directly to our website. And we're also on social media Monday through Friday, or 8 to 5 is when we are open. But you can drop in for career coaching drop-ins, either virtually or in person. On Monday through Friday from 10 to 3, or you can make a career coaching appointment if you want a one-on-one with a career coach and hire a Niner. And the website for that is han.charlotte.edu. So that's all the content that I have. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and then I'm happy to take questions that y'all may have about small talk, about talking about March Madness, whatever that may be. Okay, Rachel, is it appropriate starting small talk in a group interview? Are you talking about when you're with other candidates, or is it more of like a panel interview and you're the only candidate and there's multiple people? Can you expand a little bit? I think yes, the answer is yes. I would use it in either situation, but just wanted to make sure. And feel free to unmute yourself with other candidates. Yeah, I mean, I would, because it's very likely that people are observing you in that interview. So as soon as you get into the interview environment, whatever that is, as soon as you even get into the lobby, let's say you have to go through a lobby in your interview experience, you're kind of being observed by different people. So for me, if I'm a hiring manager, I want to see how these candidates also interact with one another, because that could give me a sense of, this is what I can expect as a member of our team. This is kind of what they, what I can kind of, expect. So it's always good to interact. Doesn't mean that you have to be super talkative. You don't have to be an extroverted person to engage in small talk. You can definitely do this if you feel like you're more of an introverted person, and you don't have to talk to every single person. Maybe you just talk to the person that's next to you. But yeah, I would recommend doing that for sure.